Imagine walking through your own house in the pitch dark.
Oh, yeah, like middle of the night.
Right. And you've lived there for, I don't know, 10 years.
Mm-hmm.
You know the space so intimately that the geography of it is practically wired into your nervous system.
Yeah, it's just muscle memory at that point.
Exactly. You know exactly how many steps it takes to get from the edge of the bedroom doorway to the kitchen counter. You know which floorboards creak. You know the exact angle to pivot past the hallway table.
It's a state of total, unquestioned confidence, really. You don't even feel the need to put your hands out to feel your way along the walls.
No, not at all.
Because your brain has mapped the environment so perfectly that your eyes are, well, they're entirely unnecessary.
And you're operating on absolute muscle memory. It feels like mastery. And then, bam.
Ouch.
Yeah, you smash your shin right into the solid, unforgiving edge of a heavy oak dining chair.
The worst pain imaginable.
Oh, it's blinding. And as you're standing there in the dark, clutching your leg, you realize something terrifying.
The room had changed, but your mind hadn't.
Yes. Someone moved that chair earlier in the afternoon.
Right. And your ironclad memory of that room, your absolute certainty about the layout actually blinded you to the physical reality of the room in that specific present moment.
Your confidence was the very thing that caused your downfall. I mean, think about it. If you had walked into a strange house in the dark, you would have moved slowly.
You would have kept your hands out.
You would have been hyper-aware, constantly testing the environment. But because you assumed you knew the space, you completely stopped paying attention to it.
Which is such a profound psychological trap.
It really is. And, well, welcome to another deep dive. I am incredibly glad you're here with us today because that exact phenomenon, that dangerous silent collision between what we deeply assume is true and what is actually true, is the foundation of our entire conversation.
It's a huge topic.
Today, we have our hands on a remarkably insightful manuscript titled The Invisible Community. Now, to set the stage for you, this text is written primarily as a guide for church leaders and faith-based organizations trying to navigate the complexities of community ministry.
Right, that's the original target audience.
But the mission of our deep dive today is to extract the universal insights buried in these pages. The observations this author makes about human behavior, sociological layers, and organizational blindness are absolutely profound for anyone.
Anyone at all.
Yeah. Whether you are listening to this right now as someone managing a corporate team, leading a neighborhood association, trying to build a business, or honestly just trying to be a better human being in your own city, this text is going to fundamentally change how you look at the streets you drive down every single day.
It truly is a masterclass in the lost discipline of paying attention. I mean, the manuscript addresses a very specific, often heartbreaking crisis.
Yeah, it really does.
It asks a question that should keep any leader awake at night. How is it possible for well-intentioned, highly active, and deeply sincere groups of people to completely, utterly miss the very individuals they are desperately trying to reach?
Okay, let's unpack this. We are going to explore what the author calls community mapping.
But not the boring kind.
Right. To be clear right up front, we are not talking about a dry, bureaucratic data collection exercise where you sit in an office staring at census spreadsheets and demographic pie charts.
No one wants that.
We are talking about mapping as an active discipline of unlearning our most stubborn assumptions. It's about peeling back the invisible layers of our own neighborhoods and finally seeing the hidden world that has been operating right in front of us the entire time.
The author opens with a premise that is quite jarring, actually.
Oh, yeah.
The text argues that the greatest obstacle to effective mission, whether that's a community outreach program or a neighborhood revitalization effort, isn't a lack of passion.
Which is usually what we blame it on.
Exactly. It isn't a lack of love or a shortage of resources or a deficit in funding. The absolute greatest obstacle is a fundamental failure to see.
A failure to see. The phrase used in the manuscript is blindness shaped by familiarity.
Such a great phrase.
And this brings us right back to that painful walk through your house in the dark. When an organization, a church, a nonprofit, a civic group, or even a local business has been embedded in a specific neighborhood for decades, they naturally begin to assume they know the area.
The logic seems sound, right? Like, we have a physical address here, we have been here for 40 years, therefore we understand this place.
But the source material argues that this longevity actually calcifies into a veil.
they fall into the trap of mistaking proximity for understanding.
Ah, proximity for understanding.
Yeah, physical nearness does not automatically equal relational depth. When an institution relies entirely on its historical assumption of a neighborhood, the people inside that institution stop observing. They stop asking questions.
They just run on autopilot.
Exactly. And the tragedy here is that they begin to see the community not as a collection of complex living humans, but as static categories.
Like demographics.
Yes. They look out the window and see the youth, or the poor, or the unchurched, or the target demographic. They reduce intricate, layered human stories into manageable logistical problems.
Hold on a second, though.
Oh,
I'm struggling with that a bit because if I've been deeply embedded in my own neighborhood for 20 years, my intuition isn't a liability, it's an asset.
that's the counter-argument, sure.
Right, like I know these streets. I know that the coffee shop gets busy at 7:30 a.m. I know which families have lived on a block for generations. Doesn't being in a place for a long time naturally give you a kind of osmotic understanding of what people need?
Right.
Why is the author penalizing experience?
That is the exact defense most legacy organizations use. But the text explains that communities are not static dioramas in a museum. They are living, breathing, constantly shifting ecologies. Over a 20-year span, the macroeconomics of a city change. Housing patterns fracture. Bus routes and transit lines are adjusted, completely altering how people move.
Wow, yeah. I mean, the bus route changing could change everything for a block.
Exactly. Generational trauma is passed down and mutates. New cultural pressures, digital anxieties, and social dynamics emerge. If your organization has been sitting on the same corner for 20 years, but you stopped actively, aggressively listening to the neighborhood 15 years ago, your prized intuitive understanding is actually just a phantom memory.
Wow. So you're navigating a modern crisis using an obsolete map and wondering why you keep getting lost.
Precisely. And the text emphasizes that sight in this context is not an optical function. It is a moral and interpretive function. It's about the heavy burden of discernment.
Can you give an example of that from the text?
Yeah, to illustrate this, the author points to the historical accounts of how Jesus operated. When Jesus looked out at a massive crowd, the text notes that he didn't just see a generic mass of humanity. He didn't see a logistical nightmare of how to feed them. And he certainly didn't see a captive audience to be manipulated.
The text specifically says, he saw them as sheep without a shepherd.
Right. He saw their hidden weariness. He interpreted their underlying confusion and vulnerability. That kind of true sight requires a massive ego death for an organization.
Ego death. That's a strong way to put it.
It is, but it requires the humility to stop asking the internal self-centered question, like, what can our organization do today to look successful? And start asking the external vulnerable question, what is actually here?
What is actually here? That is a deeply disruptive question. I mean, it strips away all the branding and the mission statements. It forces you to look at the reality of the pavement outside your door.
It really does.
And the text takes this a step further, arguing that if failing to see the reality of our location is the core disease, then the cure requires us to fundamentally rethink how we view place and geography altogether.
The author dives into what they term the theology of nearness. And even if you approach this from a purely secular perspective, the sociological implications are staggering.
Totally.
The text makes a fierce case that God works in hyper-specific places, not in vague abstractions. Throughout the biblical narrative, geography is never treated as an incidental background detail. It is always central to the action.
You see that everywhere.
Yeah.
Abraham isn't just told to be a good person. He's called to migrate to a specific geographical land.
Right.
Moses doesn't have a vague spiritual epiphany. He stands on a specific patch of dirt that is declared holy ground. The prophets aren't just shouting into the void. They're deployed to specific crumbling cities in the midst of specific geopolitical crises.
And the ultimate model the text presents for this is the incarnation, the theological concept of the word becoming flesh.
Yeah.
The author is adamant that Jesus didn't save humanity from a safe, detached, sanitized distance. He didn't just broadcast a manifesto from the heavens. He walked dusty, dangerous roads.
He sat at actual splintered wooden tables.
Yes. He physically touched people who were considered ritually unclean. He responded to human agony within its strict, localized context. God's first answer to the problem of human distance and suffering was to cross the void and come close.
Which is a massive indictment of how so many of our modern systems operate today. We absolutely love speaking in these grand, sweeping generalities. It makes us feel noble.
Oh, we love it.
We talk on social media about reaching the lost or fighting for the marginalized or helping the poor, but the text argues that operating from that kind of emotional or spiritual altitude is actually a way of avoiding real engagement.
Because it simplifies people to the point of erasure.
Yeah.
The author writes a brilliant line about this, quote, "Abstraction gives the illusion of clarity without the burden of understanding."
Oh, wow. Let's just pause on that. Abstraction gives the illusion of clarity without the burden of understanding.
Think about the psychological defense mechanism happening there. When you talk about the poor as a massive monolithic category, you feel like you've identified a clear problem.
It feels like you're doing something.
But categorizing is cheap. It costs you nothing, because if you keep it abstract, you never have to carry the crushing, exhausting burden of understanding the specific single mother who lives 3 streets away, who is desperately trying to coordinate 3 different unreliable bus routes just to get her kids to school before she starts a grueling split shift at a diner.
Yeah. Generalities are safe. They let us sleep at night. Specifics are heavy. Specifics demand action. Specifics break your heart.
That's exactly it.
But wait, isn't the opposite true in our current culture? We live in an era defined by scale. Silicon Valley has trained us that if an idea cannot scale to reach 1 million users, it's a failure.
Oh, 100%. The pressure to scale is everywhere.
We want to build massive digital platforms, spark global movements, and reach thousands of people simultaneously. So if an organization decides to abandon the high altitude and focus on hyper-local geography, like committing to one specific street corner or one single apartment complex, doesn't that fundamentally limit their impact?
It feels that way, yeah.
How can this deep, slow, hyper-local focus possibly compete with the desire to make a broad, sweeping difference in the world?
That is the exact agonizing tension that every modern leader faces. The pressure to scale is immense. But the expert analysis within the text counters this by arguing that local, context-heavy mission is not a lesser, smaller, or inferior form of impact.
Okay, then what is it?
It is actually the only valid testing ground for truth. The problem with scalable solutions in the realm of human care is that scalability almost always demands detachment.
Oh, right.
You can scale a software product, you can scale a supply chain, you cannot scale intimacy.
You cannot scale intimacy. That is profound. If you want true transformation, you have to do the slow, unscalable work.
The author uses the Apostle Paul to illustrate this perfectly. Paul is arguably history's most famous cross-continental missionary. He had a massive, sweeping vision.
Very scalable in theory.
Right. But he completely rejected the idea of a copy-and-paste scalable model. The text points out how radically different his approach was depending on the exact coordinates of his feet. Well, when Paul was reasoning in the Jewish synagogue, he used one specific set of historical and scriptural arguments. But when he walked into Athens and stood before the Greek philosophers on Mars Hill, he didn't just repeat the synagogue speech.
He observed their city.
He observed their city. He found an altar to an unknown god. He quoted their own pagan poets to them. He completely translated the mechanism of his message. The core truth remained entirely unchanged, but the application was fiercely, intensely contextual.
The text summarizes that whole concept with a devastating line, actually. Generic compassion is too blunt to heal.
Wow. Yes.
You can have all the compassion in the world, but if it's generic, it's just a blunt instrument. It's
Yeah.
like a surgeon trying to perform a delicate bypass operation using a sledgehammer.
It's just going to cause more damage.
Exactly. So if an organization actually commits to this, if they say, okay, we are abandoning the high-altitude abstractions, we are throwing away the sledgehammer, we are getting hyper-local and coming close, what exactly are they supposed to look for?
That's the million-dollar question.
If you want to stop making assumptions and actually read a neighborhood, how do you do it?
You have to train your eyes to look beneath the concrete. The text warns that the visible layer of any community is merely the entrance. It's the lobby.
I love you. Okay.
If an organization only measures what can be easily counted, photographed, or slapped onto an annual report, like the number of buildings, the flow of traffic, or the head count at a weekend event, they completely, hopelessly miss the hidden architecture that actually holds the community together.
It makes me think of a vintage mechanical watch.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah, if you just glance at the visible layer, you're only looking at the face of the watch. You see the numbers, you see the second-hand ticking, you can read the time. It looks like a very simple, flat mechanism.
But it's not.
No.
Oh.
But the reality of how that watch functions is entirely dependent on this incredibly complex, interlocking gear system hidden underneath the face. The gears, the springs, the tension, that is what actually drives the hands. If you want to fix the watch, staring at the hands won't help you at all. You have to open the back.
That is a phenomenal way to visualize what the text outlines. The author essentially opens the back of the watch and breaks down the hidden architecture of a community into 5 distinct overlapping layers.
Okay, let's go through them.
And each layer requires a deeper level of observation to map. First, there's the visible layer. As you noted, these are the structures, the formal events, the public schedules, the storefronts.
Stuff you can see driving by.
Exactly, what anyone with a pair of eyes can see simply by driving through the area at 20 miles an hour.
Huh?
Second, we move beneath the surface to the relational layer.
The gears.
The gears. This is the hidden network of trust. It's the invisible wiring of the neighborhood. Who are the informal gatekeepers? Who actually influences the decisions of the block? It's rarely the person with the official title.
Wait, really? It's usually not the mayor or the HOA president.
Rarely. It's usually a longtime resident or a local shop owner. Third is the rhythmic layer. This is a fascinating sociological concept. Communities do not operate randomly. They move to a deeply ingrained beat.
What does that mean, practically?
This layer is about tracking work shifts. It's understanding the exact transit times of the local bus. It's mapping the school cycles or the seasonal crushing pressures of local industry.
Right. If you don't know the rhythm, you're always out of step.
Fourth is the narrative layer. This is where you encounter the shared stories of the people, the communal memories of hardship, the stories of resilience during a flood 5 years ago, or the quiet, simmering anger of betrayal by a city council or a past institution that promised to help and then vanished.
The stuff people don't talk about on a first meeting.
Exactly. And finally, you reach the absolute core, the emotional and spiritual layer. This is the bedrock. These are the hidden wounds of a neighborhood, the communal shame, the desperate, unspoken questions that people carry in their chests every single day, like, am I actually safe in this place? Or does God, or anyone for that matter, actually care about my situation?
Think about the listener right now applying this to their own context. If you run a company, you have a visible layer, your org chart, your quarterly meetings. But beneath that is the relational layer, who actually holds the influence in the break room.
Oh, totally. It applies everywhere.
There's the rhythmic layer, the unspoken burnout cycles of your industry. There's a narrative layer, the lingering resentment from a round of layoffs 3 years ago. You have to read the whole ecology.
You really do.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. The text introduces a really difficult paradox here. The author states that trust is the bridge over which truth travels. You cannot impart truth or help without trust.
Right.
But how does an organization go about mapping something as invisible and fragile as trust, or unspoken spiritual wounds? If you try to map the emotional layer, don't you run the risk of treating the people in your neighborhood like test subjects in some cold clinical sociological experiment?
The author is hyper-aware of that exact danger. This raises the critical distinction the text makes between observation and surveillance.
Okay, observation versus surveillance.
And the line between the two is entirely determined by intent. Surveillance is an act of power. It seeks control. It views human beings as data points to be extracted, managed, or exploited for the organization's benefit.
Likes.
But mapping, as defined here, must be a spiritual discipline of repentance and listening. It is an act of sacred observation, which seeks only understanding and the elevation of human dignity.
It's the difference between spying on a community to figure out how to market to them versus sitting with a community to learn how to love them.
Exactly. And the mechanism for mapping the emotional layer is what the text calls ordinary fidelity.
Ordinary fidelity.
It is not achieved through a slick survey or a focus group.
Right.
It is achieved through profound patience. It's sitting with people on a park bench. It's taking the time to learn and remember names over months and years.
It's just showing up.
It's spending time in a neighborhood not on the day you have a branded flyer to hand out, but on a mundane, rainy Tuesday morning. It's quietly observing where people naturally gather because they feel a sense of safety and noting the spaces they actively avoid because they feel exposed. You cannot shortcut this. You map trust by proving yourself to be trustworthy over a long period of time.
That requires slowing down to a speed that most modern organizations find absolutely agonizing.
It's incredibly slow.
It's the speed of relationship. But why do institutions resist diving into these deeper layers? Why do they stay in the shallows?
The text points out something fascinating here. It's often because organizations are emotionally paralyzed by their own glorious pasts.
The text identifies a deeply entrenched organizational pathology. It calls it ministry by myth.
Ministry by myth. It sounds like the title of a fantasy novel, but it's actually a description of institutional delusion.
It is the tragedy of an organization that continues to operate, plan, and budget based on a narrative of the community that used to be true 30 years ago, but has completely lost its connection to present reality. Oh, wow.
They are executing programs for a phantom demographic. They are, quite literally, serving a ghost.
It's exactly like trying to navigate a rapidly booming, constantly under construction, modern city using a street map printed in 1995.
Yes.
You are behind the wheel, driving perfectly.
Hmm.
You are following all the rules of the road. Your turn signals are engaged. You are obeying the speed limit. You are a model driver.
Doing everything right, technically.
But you keep crashing into concrete barriers and glass buildings that didn't even exist when your map was drawn.
Yeah.
You are perfectly, flawlessly executing a strategy for a world that has vanished.
And the psychological force that keeps organizations locked into that 1995 map is nostalgia. The author spends significant time exploring the immense, seductive power of nostalgia within human institutions.
Nostalgia can be so dangerous.
It disguises itself as a virtue. It feels like reverence for the founders. It feels like honoring tradition. But unchecked nostalgia quietly, systematically hollows out an organization's core mission.
Can you give an example of how that plays out?
You can see this playing out in countless ways. A well-meaning church might rigidly keep its main community services at times that were perfectly calibrated for a predominantly industrial 9-to-5 workforce 3 decades ago.
Sure, Sunday mornings at 10 or whatever.
Right. But today, the neighborhood is filled with gig economy workers, nurses on rotating shifts, and single parents navigating erratic school schedules. The church leadership is exhausted. They are deeply sincere in their efforts. They are praying for people to come, but they are completely misaligned with the rhythmic layer of their actual surroundings.
The text delivers a devastating blow to that kind of earnest effort with a single sentence, actually. Sincerity does not guarantee relevance.
That line hurts.
It really does. You can be the most sincere, hardworking, passionate person on the planet, bleeding for your cause, and still be totally irrelevant to the actual bleeding needs of the people right outside your window.
Absolutely.
But this puts a leader in an incredibly tough spot. How do you tell the difference? If you are managing a legacy organization, how do you know if you are rightfully honoring a beautiful foundational legacy versus being blindly trapped by a myth?
The author provides a diagnostic tool for this by drawing a sharp distinction between biblical memory and discernment.
Okay, what's the difference?
Biblical memory is essential. It asks the question, what has God done? It looks backward to honor the faithfulness of the past. But discernment requires a pivot. It asks the terrifying immediate question, what is God doing now?
What is God doing now in this exact moment in this changed landscape?
Yes. The text argues that having the courage to release an outdated assumption isn't an act of betrayal against your founders, it is an act of obedience to the present reality.
But people resist that so much.
The resistance to this is profound. The author makes a piercing psychological observation here. The human heart almost always prefers familiar loss to unfamiliar calling.
Wow. Let that sink in for a second.
Yeah.
The heart prefers familiar loss to unfamiliar calling.
It explains so much of institutional decline. It is emotionally easier and less threatening to our ego for an organization to slowly, comfortably decline while doing things the familiar way, surrounded by the memories of past success, than to face the absolute terror of stepping into the unknown and learning a completely new way to exist in a changed community.
It's the comfort of a slow death versus the pain of a rebirth. And according to the source material, one of the most massive, stubborn myths that Western organizations claim to, the most pervasive, outdated assumption, is who exactly they are trying to reach in the first place.
This is a huge paradigm shift.
Right. Because in our modern, highly secularized, Western-influenced society, we are obsessed with the individual. Everything is tailored to individual choice. We have individual marketing profiles, individual spiritual journeys, individual metrics of success.
But the text says something different.
Yeah, the text asks us to zoom out and adopt a completely different, ancient unit of measurement.
The author directly challenges the modern paradigm of the isolated spiritual consumer. The text argues compellingly that if you look at the biblical framework, the true unit of ministry and societal transformation is rarely the isolated individual. It is almost always the household.
The household ecology. This is massive.
It changes everything about how you view a neighborhood. If you trace the biblical narratives, you see that moments of salvation, covenant, and deep transformation repeatedly bypass public assemblies to enter domestic spaces.
Like where?
The text cites the original Passover, a foundational event that did not happen in a massive stadium, but around tables in individual homes. It points to Rahab, a woman on the margins in Jericho, whose act of faith didn't just save her as an individual, but formed an umbrella of protection over her entire extended household.
Oh, that's true.
It mentions Zacchaeus, the corrupt tax collector. Jesus doesn't just offer him individual forgiveness in the street. He insists on entering Zacchaeus' domestic space, sitting at his table, altering the entire economic and social dynamic of that home. And the Philippian jailer, where an earthquake leads to the baptism and transformation of an entire family unit in the middle of the night.
If you're listening to this and you've grown up entirely in the West, this concept of communal household identity can feel completely foreign. We think, I think, therefore I am.
Exactly.
But much of the world, and certainly the biblical world, operates on the principle of we are, therefore I am. So how does this abstract concept of household ecology actually play out on the pavement today? How does it change the way an organization operates?
The text explains that you have to stop treating people as blank slates. When a person walks through the doors of a community center or a church, they do not arrive unattached from the world, floating in a vacuum.
Right, they bring their whole context.
They bring the invisible, complex web of their household ecology with them. They carry the heavy influence of their parents' expectations. They are bound by their family's collective work schedules. They are restricted by their transit limitations. And most importantly, their choices are governed by the hidden gatekeepers of their extended family.
It's like looking at a massive, intricate tapestry and deciding you just want to interact with one single, brightly colored thread in the center.
Yes, perfect analogy.
You think you can just isolate that one thread at one individual teenager or that one young professional. But the moment you reach out and tug on that thread, you realize it is completely tightly interwoven into a massive web of other threads, and you end up pulling on the entire tapestry.
That's a perfect visualization. The text provides a very practical, grounded example of how this misunderstanding plays out. Imagine a well-funded church or nonprofit spends months planning a massive Friday night youth event.
Okay, classic outreach.
They rent the lights, they get the music, they order the pizza, and then only a handful of teenagers from the surrounding working-class neighborhood actually show up. The leadership sits in a room on Monday morning incredibly frustrated, and they conclude, based on their individualistic framework, that the youth in this neighborhood are simply apathetic, lazy, or actively resistant to their message.
Because they're just looking at the individual choice.
Exactly. But if that leadership team had taken the time to map the household ecology, they would discover a completely different reality. They would realize the lack of attendance has nothing to do with spiritual apathy. It has everything to do with household survival.
Wow.
It's about the fact that the single mother is working a swing shift on Friday night, and the 15-year-old they're trying to reach is the only person available to watch the 3 younger siblings. Or it's about the fact that the cost of the tricycle ride to get to the event requires spending money that the family needs for rice the next morning. The organization misdiagnosed a complex ecological constraint as an individual moral failure.
Man, I understand the theory, but let's be fiercely practical for a moment. If we demand that an organization shift its focus from the easily reachable individual to this massive, tangled, incredibly complex web of households, doesn't that make the work impossibly complicated?
It definitely complicates things.
Honestly, in a world of limited time and budgets, it is so much easier, so much more efficient to just hand a flyer to a teenager on the street or run a highly targeted social media ad based on individual browsing habits than to try and untangle their extended family dynamics and memorize their transit schedules. Aren't we asking volunteers to become sociologists?
The author completely concedes that point. Focusing on the household ecology is absolutely slower. It is vastly harder. It defies every modern metric of efficiency.
So why do it?
But the text's counterargument is that convenience comes at the devastating cost of relevance. If you choose the fast, easy, individualistic route, you will eventually become irrelevant to the deep structures of that community. If you want true, lasting impact, you have to do the slow, grueling work. And the text highlights that the first step in this slow work is training yourself to notice the hidden people within these ecologies.
The hidden people. Who exactly are they looking for?
They are the relational anchors of a neighborhood who will never appear on an official city census or a corporate leadership chart. They are the grandmothers who sit on the porch and pray over the street every single morning, watching everyone who comes and goes.
People who actually run the block.
Exactly. They are the local tricycle drivers or taxi drivers who know the intricate daily struggles of 100 different families because they serve as the informal therapist during morning commutes. They are the aunts who provide the emergency childcare and keep the peace when family networks fracture.
And if an organization decides to bypass these hidden informal leaders because it's quote-unquote easier to just hand out flyers at a subway stop.
They are actively bypassing the actual functioning channels of trust in that community. They're acting like an invasive species rather than a grafted branch.
Because trust travels through relationships, not through graphic design.
Precisely. And this is why the author places such a massive emphasis on the ancient practice of hospitality. We aren't talking about entertaining, we are talking about shared meals, lingering conversations on front steps, and home visits.
Real hospitality.
Yes, hospitality becomes the primary language of presence. You simply cannot reach, understand, or heal a household ecology from a microphone on a stage. You have to be invited into the domestic space, and you only get invited if you have honored the hidden people.
And when an organization finally humbles itself enough to start doing that, when they actually look at these households, acknowledge the grandmothers, and trace the existing trust networks, they are inevitably forced to confront another incredibly arrogant assumption.
This is a tough pill to swallow.
It might be the most challenging part of the entire manuscript. It's the deeply ingrained idea that we, our specific organization with our shiny logo and our newly formulated mission statement, are the very first ones to bring any kind of grace, light, or life to this neighborhood.
The text is absolutely uncompromising on this point. It states as a foundational rule, mission fields are never empty.
A neighborhood is never a blank slate.
Never. The author insists that long before your organization ever signed a lease, long before your team ever held a brainstorming session, people in that neighborhood were already living deep, complex lives. They were already coping with trauma.
Yeah.
They were already making profound meaning out of their suffering. They were already sharing scarce resources, exchanging informal childcare, and building resilient support systems to keep each other alive.
The text states that to walk into a neighborhood and treat it as a blank slate, to act as if nothing good, true, or beautiful existed before your organization arrived, is not just ignorant, it is a form of arrogant spiritual colonization.
That's exactly how the text phrases it.
Think about it like walking into a bustling, chaotic kitchen where a family has been cooking a massive, complex, generational recipe all day. The grandmother's been adjusting the spices, the aunts have been chopping the vegetables, the broth has been simmering on the stove for 8 hours, filling the whole house with this rich aroma.
I can almost smell it.
And you, representing an outside organization, just barge through the back door, carrying a bag of generic ingredients, and you just start dumping them into the pot.
Without even asking.
You don't ask what they're making. You don't taste the broth. You don't respect the process. You just assume, because you showed up, that they desperately need your ingredients to save the meal.
That is a vivid, incredibly accurate picture of what the text defines as savior thinking. It is the false, deeply toxic belief that an institution, a church, or a nonprofit is the primary source of life, redemption, or order in a given area. The author forcefully reminds faith-based readers of their own theology. Christ alone is the savior. The church or the organization is merely a witness. Their job is not to initiate salvation, but to identify and join the redemptive work that God is already quietly doing in the margins of that community.
So the posture shifts entirely from "we're here to save you" to "we're here to join you."
Yes. The text illuminates this by pointing to the words of Jesus, "Open your eyes and look at the fields. They are ripe for harvest." The author points out that a field that is white for harvest is not an empty, barren patch of dirt waiting for you to come and plant seeds.
The seeds have already been planted.
It means the grace, the resilience, the hidden networks of mutual care, the life is already there. It is already grown. It is already ripening. Your job is to have the humility to recognize it and the gentleness to harvest it without trampling the roots.
So what does this all mean? This raises a really critical question for anyone listening who leads an organization with strong, uncompromising foundational convictions, whether it's a deeply held theological belief or a non-negotiable corporate core value. How do we balance this deep, humble, deferential respect for the local context and the existing community networks without completely watering down our own message.
That's the real fear, isn't it?
Yeah, how do you avoid compromising your core convictions just to blend in?
The source material anticipates that exact fear and addresses the tension beautifully. It introduces the paradigm of context without compromise. The author argues that adapting to the local grain of a neighborhood, learning its rhythms, speaking its language, honoring its hidden leaders, does not mean diluting your truth. It means doing the hard work of translating your truth so it can actually be comprehended.
Translation is not the same as dilution.
Exactly. It is the discipline of finding the existing cultural vocabulary to express a timeless principle. And practically, it means adopting a strategy of strengthening rather than overriding.
Could you give an example of that?
Let me give you a tangible example based on the text's philosophy. Let's say your organization recognizes a crisis of loneliness and mental health struggles among the elderly in a specific neighborhood. The traditional save your thinking approach would be to raise funds, lease a building, brand it with your logo, launch a senior care initiative, and try to convince the elderly to come to your new alien program.
Right, the typical nonprofit playbook.
But the context without compromise approach operates entirely differently. First, you map the community. Through observation, you discover the informal care networks that already exist. You notice the local market vendor who always takes an extra 10 minutes to listen to the anxieties of her older customer.
You find the hidden people.
Yes. You identify the retired neighbor who unofficially checks on the widows down his street every Tuesday. Instead of launching a competing program, you approach that market vendor and that retired neighbor. You ask, how can we support what you are already doing?
That's so good.
Do you need resources? Do you need us to cover your stall for an hour? Do you need help buying groceries for those visits? You seek to strengthen, resource, and redeem the existing organic efforts, rather than crushing them under the weight of your own shiny, branded institutional machinery.
You empower the people whose hands are already in the soil. That is brilliant. Okay, so let's follow this progression. Let's say an organization listens to this deep dive, and they do everything right. They repent of their institutional nostalgia. They throw away the 1995 map. They map the complex household ecology.
They do the hard work.
They build trust through ordinary fidelity. They identify the grandmothers and the tricycle drivers. They adopt a posture of joining the existing work rather than barging into the kitchen with their own ingredients.
If they do all of that, they're in a great spot.
Right. If they do all of this successfully, they will end up with a massive, staggering amount of incredibly sensitive data about the pain, the rhythms, and the needs of their community. They have successfully mapped the hidden layers. But the author drops a massive, counterintuitive warning right here, doesn't it?
It does. It is a sobering reality check. The text warns that data alone, no matter how profound or accurately mapped, does not produce mission. You can gather an infinite amount of information without an ounce of actual transformation occurring in the real world.
You can have the most beautiful, meticulously color-coded map of your neighborhood's suffering hanging on your office wall and still do absolutely nothing to alleviate it. Or worse, you can do the completely wrong thing.
Precisely. A map is a diagnostic tool. It can show you with pinpoint accuracy exactly where a need is concentrated. It can highlight a food desert or a spike in addiction or a lack of after-school care. But a map cannot tell you if your specific organization is the one called to fix it.
Oh, that's a hard truth.
The author insists that the hardest step for any active, ambitious group is moving from the acquisition of data to the practice of prayerful discernment.
You have to cross the boundary between merely knowing a fact and truly understanding your role.
The text offers a sharp critique of the modern world's absolute worship of measurement and action. We operate under the assumption that whatever can be counted can be, and therefore must be, solved immediately by us.
We want to fix everything we see.
When a leadership team looks at a spreadsheet of newly mapped community needs, their instinct is to treat it as a master to-do list. But the text offers a profound, almost heretical caution to the ambitious leader. Not every need is your assignment.
I want everyone listening to write that down. Not every need is your assignment.
It sounds callous at first, but it is actually the key to long-term survival. If group, driven by genuine compassion but lacking discernment, tries to rush in and fill every single gap, every single wound they map out, they will inevitably collapse.
They'll just break.
They will be crushed under the sheer infinite weight of human need. They will burn out their most dedicated people, scatter their resources, and ultimately render themselves entirely ineffective.
I hear that. but I have to play the role of the frustrated, bleeding heart volunteer for a moment.
Go for it.
If you have done the slow, hard work of mapping, and your data reveals a massive, glaring, urgent crisis in your neighborhood, let's say children are literally going hungry on the weekends, or there is a sudden, terrifying spike in youth depression in the local high school. If you see that, isn't it your absolute, non-negotiable moral duty to act immediately?
It feels like it, certainly.
If a leadership team just sits back, strokes their chins, and says, well, let's weigh this and pray about it to see if it's our specific assignment, isn't that just a spiritualized, cowardly excuse for bureaucratic delay? Aren't we just using the word discernment to avoid doing the terrifying hard work of intervening?
That is the exact agonizing tension the text wrestles with, and it is the tension every empathetic person feels. Ambition, urgency, and guilt all scream the same question: how quickly can we move?
Right.
But the text introduces a concept to counter this panic, and it is arguably the most powerful phrase in the entire manuscript. Waiting in the kingdom of God is not inactivity. It is obedience under tension.
Obedience under tension. Just feeling the weight of those words. It acknowledges the physical discomfort of seeing a problem and not immediately rushing to fix it.
Because true discernment is not cowardice. It is brutal, sobering honesty. It forces a leadership team to ask the hard questions that guilt wants to ignore.
Like what?
It asks, what can our specific, limited organization actually sustain for the next 5 years without burning our volunteers to ashes after 6 months? It asks, does this glaring need actually require us to create a brand new, half-baked initiative, or does wisdom dictate that we simply write a check and partner with an obscure local group that is already doing this work 10 times better than we ever could?
That requires so much humility.
Wisdom asks, what is our actual assignment? Rather than letting the intoxicating hero complex or the paralyzing guilt drive us into an unsustainable frenzy of activity.
It's the critical difference between being wildly reactive to every fire and being deeply, sustainably responsive to the specific fires you have the water to fight. And when an organization finally navigates that tension, when they do the hard work of discernment and finally figure out their true, specific assignment, the text makes one final, beautiful observation. It points out that the execution of this assignment rarely, if ever, takes place where we expect it to.
It completely upends our geographical hierarchy of importance. The work of transformation rarely takes place on a brightly lit stage.
Oh.
It rarely happens behind a polished pulpit or in an air-conditioned corporate boardroom or during a massive, heavily marketed weekend event. It takes place somewhere completely, beautifully mundane.
The author challenges the pervasive illusion that meaningful work or true ministry only happens in official, formal, sanitized spaces. The text looks back the life of Jesus and points out that his most profound interactions didn't happen in the temple.
They happened out in the open.
They happened at communal water wells. They happened on dusty roadsides. They happened in the cramped, smelly confines of fishing boats, in the agonizing grief of a graveyard. The author calls this the ministry of ordinary places, and it is a desperate plea for us to recover a sense of reverence for the common, everyday life of our neighborhoods.
The source material is remarkably specific about these ordinary places, and it breaks down exactly what they reveal about a community if we have the trained eyes to see them.
Like the Sari store, right?
Exactly. The text spends time analyzing the phenomenon of the Sari store, the tiny, local neighborhood convenience shop ubiquitous in many parts of the world, or the corner bodega in a western city. To the unobservant eye, it's just a place to buy a soda or a single stick of butter.
But it's so much more than that.
But the author explains that the local store is actually a living, breathing map of the neighborhood's hidden life. It is the economic and social barometer of the block. The person standing behind that counter knows exactly who is struggling financially because they know who has suddenly started asking for credit. They know who is socially isolated because they know who comes in 3 times a day just to have a brief conversation.
The text also mentions the clinic waiting room.
Yes, the public health clinic waiting room. The author describes this space not as a medical facility, but as a chamber of raw vulnerability, endurance, and unspoken prayer.
It's an intense space.
The physical masks come off in a waiting room. The anxiety of poverty, the fear of illness, the deep love for a sick child, it is all laid bare. People are infinitely more honest in the fluorescent light of a clinic waiting room than they will ever be sitting in the back row of a formal meeting or a church service.
It also highlights the school gate.
The school gate is a profound threshold. It is described as the daily intersection of family rhythm, parental anxiety, and generational hope. If you want to see the stress of the household ecology playing out in real time, go to the school drop-off line. You will see the exhausted parents rushing to their second jobs. You will see the older siblings carrying the weight of the younger ones.
Wow.
And finally, the text points to places like the local tricycle queue, the bus stop, or the neighborhood basketball court. We dismiss these as mere transit points or recreation areas. But sociologically, these are the arenas where community hierarchies are established, where respect is negotiated, and where the complex local social codes are displayed and enforced.
I love this framing so much because it exposes a major flaw in how we operate. We so often treat our organizations, our office buildings, our headquarters, or our churches like a fueling station.
A gas station.
Yeah. We treat the physical building like a gas station, where people are supposed to come on Sunday or Monday to get filled up with inspiration or grace. But the actual road trip, the brutal, beautiful living of life, the flat tires, the scenic overlooks, the breakdowns, the journey, that doesn't happen at the gas station.
Yeah.
It happens out on the highway. It happens at the school gate, the clinic waiting room, and the sorry store.
It happens in the ordinary.
But here is my practical question for the listener who is nodding along right now. How does a normal person, a busy professional, or a group of eager volunteers actually develop the social intelligence the text talks about? How do you learn to read these ordinary spaces?
That's the real challenge.
Because if I just go hang around a local bus stop or stand at a school gate staring at people and taking notes, I'm going to come across as a creep, a manipulative marketer, or a threat. How do you integrate into these spaces naturally?
The secret, according to the text, boils down to a three-word philosophy: presence before performance. You do not go to the school gate or the corner store to observe the neighborhood like a scientist studying a colony of ants under a microscope. You go to those places to simply be a neighbor. It requires a return to the discipline of familiarity.
Which means returning to the exact same places repeatedly.
Yes, the consistency is the magic. You go to the same coffee shop. You buy from the same vendor. You sit on the same park bench. You don't go there to preach a sermon. You don't go there to hand out promotional flyers for your next event. You go there to be known.
Just to be present.
You share space and you observe quietly. You buy your coffee, you ask how their day is, and you listen. Over time, months, sometimes years, that mundane, ordinary familiarity slowly morphs into trust. And trust is the only key that opens the door to real, authentic, pastoral, or communal care.
You can't hack it.
You cannot hack it. You learn the emotional geography of a community simply by choosing to share space with it consistently, without a hidden agenda, without a timeline, and without a desire to be the hero.
It is the long, slow, beautiful work of paying attention. Okay, we have covered an immense amount of ground today, and I want to bring this all together for you, the listener.
Yeah.
Because whether your personal mission is to plant a church, reach a marginalized neighborhood, understand a shifting consumer market, or simply find a way to deeply connect with the people living on your own street, we have explored some massive, necessary paradigm shifts.
We really have.
We started by confronting the terrifying reality that our own familiar routines and our unearned overconfidence actually blind us to the changing reality around us. We learned that the household ecology, that intricate, messy web of family and relationships, is a much truer, much more biblical metric for transformation than our Western obsession with the isolated individual.
We dismantled the toxic arrogance of savior thinking.
Yes, realizing that the field is never empty, and that our job is to join the resilience that is already there. We looked at the heavy, exhausting responsibility of moving from just collecting data to actually practicing the agonizing work of discernment, recognizing that sometimes waiting is simply obedience under tension. And finally, we uncovered the massive sacred potential hiding in plain sight, in the perfectly ordinary places like the school gate, the clinic waiting room, or the corner store.
The entire manuscript is ultimately a profound call to unlearn our most cherished assumptions, to strip away our institutional egos and to commit to the slow, invisible, beautiful work of simply paying attention to the world as it actually is.
Which brings us right back to where we started our conversation today. Remember that heavy oak dining chair sitting in the pitch dark?
Hard to forget.
The one you smashed your shin into because you were stubbornly navigating by the memory of how things used to be, instead of engaging with the reality of how things are right now. Think about the spaces you pass through on autopilot every single day of your life. The line at the local coffee shop, the chaotic drop-off lane at your kid's school, the crowded platform at the train station.
We just drift through them.
We do. You think you know these places perfectly. You think they are just background scenery in the movie of your life. But what if the most spiritually, socially, or organizationally significant thing you could possibly do this week isn't launching a massive new project? What if it isn't drafting a new mission statement or attending a huge, exhausting networking event?
What if it's simpler?
What if the most profound thing you could do is simply sitting on a bench in your own neighborhood, slowing your heart rate down, opening your eyes in the dark, and finally having the humility to ask, what is this place already saying? Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep observing, keep listening, and keep questioning. We'll see you next time.